Okay, good morning, everyone. I am live, as you can all see. So I've woken up in Australia this morning to news that Turkey Al Sheikh and Dana White have started, or are starting, a new boxing league. And I've not looked at any of the details of this or read anything yet. So I thought what I'd do is go live and get everyone in and we can discuss it together. I've got about 45 minutes before I have to go on an actual work call. So I thought we'll do this quickly. And I'm considering, I think what I'm going to do is, if I can, I'm going to bring my good mate, Alex Maver of Fight Energy Films into the call because he is an MMA guy. So we'll get him in. Okay, he's in the chat. That's good. So we'll get Maver in soon. We'll let the views build a bit first. But while I'm doing that, I'm gonna get some documentation for the stream so that we have details to work off. I want the full statement. That's what I'm looking for at the minute. So I need to find that. But let me bring Alex in. I will set this up and I will add him in. This should work. Actually, is Discord better? Sorry, guys. I'm just going to get Alex in. Where is Zoom? Okay. I've not done this before, but it should work. I should be able to bring someone in on a Zoom call. Let me just fire this up. Unless I can do it with WhatsApp, in which case, let me try that. But yeah, guys, get in the chat and let me know what you think about this just while I get my friend in. So Schmax has said, I've been saying that Turkey needs to start his own promotion. He has the money to make the best fight the best, like in the UFC. It's an interesting conversation, isn't it? Because I know that there's positives to the UFC, but I know that there are also negatives. And that is why I want to bring Alex in, because he can discuss this with us a little bit. Let me see. Okay. New meeting. All right. Let me try this, guys. I know this isn't going to be very interesting to listen to on the replay, so I will I'll sort it out so people can skip. Invite. All right, let's try this. Okay, I'm going to add that, and then we'll see if I can add the audio. It should work. All right, so Alex is coming on in a minute. JM says locked in. H says, I think it's good for the fans, bad for the fighters. So that is the question here, and I think that's probably what we're going to get into with Alex is this good for the fighters? Because they're probably going to have to fight more difficult fights more frequently. And the big question is, how much less money are they going to make? Because right now we've got huge stars in boxing, but we've also seen it in the UFC that they outgrow the promotion. So I think it's a really interesting debate to have. And it's a very interesting time in boxing. The Saudis really are trying to buy boxing. That is the way I view this. They are trying to take the asset. So we will see. Right, I think I can add Alex in now. Right. Alex, do you want to turn your camera off, mate? So I've just got you on audio. If you can hear me.
Harry, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, I
Great.
can indeed.
All right. Can people just bang a thumbs up in the stream if they can hear Alex's audio?
Hello, yes, it's Alex here, Fight Energy Films, of course. Harry.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
can
Can
you
people
guys
hear
hear
that?
me?
We need to wait and see if we've got enough people in to actually tell me if they can hear it or not.
Cool. How's it going over in
Um,
Australia anyway?
it's going great over in Australia. It's going very well. The second I have it confirmed that people can actually hear you, I will introduce you, and then we can get into this topic.
Yeah, massive news, isn't it? Very
It could
big.
be massive. Oh, loud and clear.
Implications in both of our worlds.
I know, right? They can hear you loud and clear. So
Perfect.
I'm gonna put your channel title in the title. I'll put feet at fight energy. Right, got you. Fight energy films. Done.
Amazing.
All right, so everyone who is on the stream currently, to introduce our guest today, we've got Alex Maver on now. What's weird and strange about Alex Maver? Well, there are many things that are weird and strange about Alex Maver, but what's particularly weird and strange about Alex Maver is that we went to uni together and we both studied religion and theology, which I think it's pretty random and pretty strange that two guys that both went to Manchester Uni to do religion and theology now both have fight channels. But that is what Alex has. He has a fight channel. It's called Fight Energy Films, and he covers the UFC and MMA in general. So I thought, who better to bring on today? Because I don't know that much about the UFC, and I think that I've got a vague idea of how the model works and whatnot, but I think we need an expert so that we can pick through this and try and figure out, is this actually a good thing for boxing, or is it a bad thing? Is it a good thing, or is it a bit of both? So, Alex, hello.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Henry. Of course, someone could probably do a thesis on why combat sports and religion and theology are related, but we'll save that for another time. Yeah, like you
Indeed.
say, absolutely massive news. I think it's going to be interesting that we're approaching this from two different angles. Obviously, my familiarity, and you were so kind to call it expertise on the UFC. I'm very, very familiar with Dana White. Using it from
Yeah.
a boxing perspective, I think you said you had the statement in front of you. So, like, what are your, from someone who is familiar with Dana White, what are your first impressions of the news?
Well, I'm trying to find the full statement because I was watching something earlier which was breaking down the nature of the agreement, and
Yeah,
words were being used like changing the way that boxing works globally. It wasn't just about changing it for America or
sure.
Saudi. And also, I think when it was first rumored, the mention was very much like, oh, this is a development thing, which I think is absolutely needed in boxing, by the way. Some kind of structure where we get fighters not just through the Olympics, but some kind of, scouting system almost that, brings through the best talent, because I think the UFC are great at picking talents out from around the world, bringing new names into the sport. I think in boxing, we're probably not quite as good at that.
Yeah.
But basically, I think it looks like it's an agreement which they are looking to fundamentally change the way that boxing works. So it's quite startling, and it's quite sort of, well, I sort of feel like, well, we're starting to get great fights now with a consistency. So why are we now going to try and change things?
Yeah. So, okay, I'll approach this from two different angles to begin with. Firstly, Dana White. He's
Yeah.
an old school Boston guy, grew up in the boxing gyms. It's no secret that he's always loved boxing. And
Mm.
he's managing or has some kind of relationship with Callum Walsh, who's an Irish fighter who he's promoting. And that was really his first recent sort of big involvement in boxing over the last few years. He was involved in it years ago, but he's steadily been putting the feelers back out there, getting involved with boxing. And now one
Right.
of the
So he does have a history with the sport, though, because I've always sort of been of the impression of him that he's just UFC and that's it.
Yeah, no,
Basically.
from a promotion perspective in the big time, yes. But in his days growing up in Boston, he was. I know that he trained. I don't know. He may have fought on some amateur level, but I definitely know that he used to train boxing. He was in and around the boxing gyms then before getting
Mm.
involved in promotion of mixed martial arts.
Yeah. Okay.
And yeah, so from the UFC side of things, one of the reasons I think that there are so many casual enjoyers of the UFC in particular is because it's so simple, right? In a similar vein to boxing, yes, you have two people facing each other, bringing different skills to the table, but I know in the middleweight division who is the best fighter in the world. I know the same from
Mm.
like heavyweight for heavyweight. In boxing, the number of belts and the amount of weight divisions, it does give people a lot of headaches, and it can lose that casual interest, which is ultimately what gets the sport in the headlines on the front pages and things like that. And obviously, the landscape has changed in the last 2 years because of Turkey Al Sheikh actually making big fights happen before fighters are past their prime. But the UFC's been doing that for years. Look at
Mm.
UFC pay-per-views from basically since the sport began. They're always filled with multiple title fights, top 10 ranked guys fighting each other. We sort of take that for granted in the world of mixed martial arts. In
Yeah.
boxing, the last crescendo marketed as the best boxing card of all time. Well, the UFC has the equivalent in mixed martial arts of that 6 times a year at least.
Right. Interesting. And I guess I have a question in terms of the way the promotion operates, because I understand that, when a sport is young and when a sport is new, it's much easier to retain control over your fighters. But in some aspects, I guess you could argue that the UFC is just a younger version of boxing, because we've seen other promotions starting to appear, right, that challenge the UFC. And then you see stars like Conor McGregor who outgrow the UFC in terms of the commercial pool that they have. So would it be fair to say that, or could it be argued that the UFC is just a younger version of what boxing is, and that ultimately it will end up in the same place one day? Or do you think that they're doing it in a way that is sustainable, that it will always be how it is?
I mean, you're opening a massive can of worms there because there is an ongoing issue regarding fighter pay and fighter dispute and whether or not the UFC is a monopoly. Because basically, the UFC, yes, there are the PFL, the Professional Fighters League, which Francis Ngannou and some fighters fight on. There's
Yeah.
various regional promotions, Cage Warriors. Bellator recently got bought by the PFL. So there are other promotions making waves in the mixed martial arts space, but the UFC isn't just number one, it's number one by a long way. And with
Mm.
that comes the potential for monopoly, which is what you're getting onto there with regards to control they have over the fighters. All the fighters want to fight for the UFC, which gives the UFC a lot more leverage when it comes to fighter pay and things like that. And that's a bit of an ongoing debate and discussion point in the world of mixed martial arts at the moment about unions, etc., etc. Boxing, these paydays that you see for the 0.001% Canelo, Tyson Fury, the fact that they're able to demand such purses because there's so many promotions, so many channels, so many broadcasters battling it out, gives the fighters who are at the very top of their game have a lot more power in boxing than they do in mixed martial arts. I don't
Yeah.
think you can quite say that it's just a younger version of boxing because the UFC as a promotion is so far ahead of the rest. It's more the equivalent of Matchroom having 99.9% of the talent in boxing. That would be a better way to describe it. Because if that was the case and Matchroom was managing all, not just some of the best fighters in the world, all of the very best fighters in the world, then Matchroom would have a lot more leverage when it came to the percentages they take, the amount they pay the fighters, and things like that. I think that's the real difference.
Right. Interesting. We'll get to a couple of comments. Guys, if you do want to sort of change the topic or anything, feel free to send a super chat and we will get to those straight away. Otherwise, I will just get to the comments as and when I have a chance. So H has challenged you, Alex. He says, have to agree with him with the UFC. It's changed since they have signed the pay-per-view away with ESPN. Cards are stacked very less stacked,
Yeah,
less stacked cards. Do you agree with
yeah,
that?
yeah. I think it's true to a point that the cards are less stacked. I also think it's the size of the UFC roster now. They've got so much, so they've got so many fighters compared to what they had a few years ago, and that just is kind of in tandem with the growth of the sport. That they have to get the fighters out within the sort of terms of their contract. They have to get them out enough, and I guess that does lead to less stacked cards in comparison to maybe pre-ESPN deal. But if we're just doing, the point was a comparison to your average boxing card, you're still getting more top 10 title fight value than you would on your typical boxing card.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, and I think the way I view it is because I think the way that Eddie Hearn and way certain people have spoken about the Saudis coming into boxing has very much been like they just love it. They've got all this money and they just want to enjoy boxing and make the best fights. That's why his Excellency's doing it. He just loves boxing. He's a huge fan of the sport. But ever since I found out the ticket price for the show that they did I think it was in Los Angeles, the Terence Crawford card last year where he fought Madrimov, I had a sense that they were trying to recoup as much money as possible, actually. And that whilst there's an initial early investment that's been going on, I don't think it's going to last forever. And I do view this deal as a way for the Saudis to ultimately create a sustainable model. You invest heavy now, you essentially buy the sport now by getting all the promoters on side, getting all the networks on side. And in the end, and ultimately, you create a situation where you have control and then you can restructure it how you see fit. But I think that there's never been anybody with enough financial power before to come in and actually fundamentally change the fabric of the way that boxing works. So yeah, I think that is the key difference, right? Because like you said, there's so many belts in boxing, there's so many promoters, so many broadcasters. Where the hell would you begin with that? Well, I would begin the way that the Saudis have done it, that I would come in and I would try and take as much control as possible before trying to change it in a way that it becomes a profitable, sustainable model.
Possibly. I just think it's the simplicity, isn't it? Because we say it all the time. I know we both love going really deep into these fights and the fighters, but that isn't ultimately what sells to the masses. You need to get the casual fan in any of these things. And I think if boxing, I mean, you can sort of picture it now, if boxing did have one heavyweight title and only one person had that, yes, Usyk basically did that by becoming undisputed. But if there was just one title out there, it would cut out a lot of the confusion and a lot of the controversy. That's not saying you have to get rid of the domestic, European, intercontinental belts and things like that. But I think when it comes to casual appeal, when you say, this guy's the heavyweight champion, but also this guy's the heavyweight champion, it sort of breeds confusion. So maybe the Turkey, Al Sheikh, and has spoken with Dana White about how the UFC, especially since the pandemic, has become an even bigger promotion that's just taken over the whole mixed martial arts scene. Maybe they're seeing that and just thinking, look, let's just strip boxing down to what it should be. Pure, simple, casual fans enjoying two men or women going into the ring and fighting each other. Maybe that's what they're seeing. It's hard to get inside of Turki Al Sheikh's mindset or Dana White's mindset when it comes to this. But I do think you're right in terms of it might be all part of some mighty restructure. At the same time, I think maybe boxing does need some slight restructuring.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to talk about that have just come to my head while you've been speaking. So the first two are, I want to talk about youth development and how it works in the UFC and how you could see that maybe translating over to boxing. I want to talk about the governing bodies in boxing because I can't imagine they're going to just roll over quietly and accept that there's going to be a new boxing league, which completely makes them irrelevant. And the other thing is something that someone's just mentioned in the comments, which is the Muhammad Ali Act. And he said, Stephen has said, I'd be very skeptical of Dana. He and the TKO CEO have been waiting to repeal the Ali Act. So for those of you that don't know, the Muhammad Ali Act, we'll read it through this, was a boxing reform act. It's federal law. It was passed in the year 2000 to protect boxers and reform the boxing industry. So the act sets minimum requirements for contracts between boxers and their managers and promoters, prohibits boxing service providers from requiring boxers to give up future promotional rights, requires sanctioning organizations to provide boxers with written explanations of their ratings, requires sanctioning organizations to file their bylaws and rating criteria with the FTC, and requires boxing commissions to disclose health and safety risks to boxers when they issue an identification card. So all the health stuff, that's kind of already there. The rating stuff, I mean, that's kind of irrelevant because they comply with it in the most loose use of the word. But the bit where it's really interesting is the minimum requirements for contracts and the boxing service providers from requiring boxers to give up future promotional rights. Because as I understand it, the UFC sort of controls all kinds of commercial image rights with their fighters. Is that right? And would would the UFC be compatible with the Muhammad Ali Act the way it currently is?
So again, this is a big discussion point currently in mixed martial arts. Just before I forget, you mentioned a few things there in terms of the sort of commercial product. The UFC,
Yeah.
before they had the Reebok sponsorship, they're now sponsored by Venom, who make the fight shorts,
Right. Yeah.
the fight wear. Before then, if you'll remember, you've seen back in the 2000s, you'll have seen loads of sponsors, logos all over the shorts and things like that. And there was a huge backlash to the Reebok deal being signed because that got rid of all the sponsors that fighters could wear on their shorts. And in a sport similar to boxing, where you're fighting 3-4 times a year in a good year, that massively impacted the potential earning of fighters. And if there was some kind of Ali Act that protected mixed martial arts fighters, then that could have been a really really valuable thing for them to have. But it massively affected their earning potential through that. The other point I want to make is the contracts. You mentioned the fighter contract, and we're going to bring up Conor McGregor as purely talking about his fight relation with the UFC. Now, Conor McGregor has been supposed to fight in the UFC. His date has kept being pushed back and pushed back, and there's various conspiracies of why this may have been. And part of that is because the UFC's broadcast deal was up for renewal, and there was a lot of conversation about, okay, so the UFC's broadcast deal is up for renegotiation. Why would they allow Conor McGregor's 2 fights on his contract to expire and allow him to become a free agent and do these Logan Paul fights and things like that? They want to keep these 2 fights that Conor McGregor has in their back pocket to use as a bargaining chip when it comes to negotiating with broadcasters, because it's a lot more valuable for a broadcaster for the UFC, for Dana White to come to the table with potential broadcasters and say, hey, we've got the record-breaking pay-per-view star across combat sports, $500 million with Floyd Mayweather. He's got something ridiculous like 6 of the top 10. Someone will correct me in the chat. I don't have the stats up for me. Could be 6 of the top 10 pay-per-views in UFC history. Conor McGregor has the record for those. So in terms of you talking about fighter rights and things like that, like I said, the Ali Act, it's in discussion about mixed martial arts, but the UFC has a hell of a lot of control over its fighters.
Yeah, that's quite a scary prospect that you would sit on a fighter's, contractually obliged final fight so that you have more.
That makes perfect business sense.
Yeah. That you're right, and it is a perfect business move. But in terms of fans getting what they want from the sport, it's a shitty move, right? It's and also for McGregor himself, awful, because he just has to sit and wait and he can't do anything. Is that his years are wasting away while the UFC decides what deal they want to do.
The same thing happened with Francis Ngannou. He won the heavyweight championship, and he was in negotiations for his defense of that, the next defense of that title, and ultimately they couldn't come to an agreement, and he went into the world of boxing. Famously, Dana White said, he's got no chance in the world of boxing. He's not going to do anything in there, and then had fights against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua.
Indeed, and arguably should have had maybe a draw in one of those as well.
Yeah.
But, we'll go through some of the comments before we move into talking about sort of youth development. So JM has subscribed to you, which is good news, guys. You should all go and subscribe to Alex's channel, Fight Energy Films, if you like.
Can I do a quick plug, Henry?
Yeah, go for it.
Would you grace me with
that?
Go
for it.
Yeah, so I exclusively cover mixed martial arts on my channel. I do fight breakdowns, interviews with fighters. I did an interview with Khalil Roundtree, who recently fought Alex Pereira for the middleweight title. I love the sport. I'm really, I cover it from all angles. So do subscribe if you're interested in mixed martial arts.
Couldn't tell you love the sport. So we've got H says, we've read that one. Teddy Nuke says it's a monopsony. I don't know what monopsony means. Do you know what monopsony means?
I know that you do quite well on Scrabble.
Right. We'll move on from that one. Beth Aniel. I feel like this is actually one of my moderators, Alex. So big up Beth Aniel.
Okay.
I feel like pay-per-view doesn't mean as much as back then. Now we have streaming, subscriptions, etc. I do think that that's not true, Beth, because even though we have streaming, subscriptions, etc., this is in boxing anyway. I don't know if it's different for the UFC, Alex. We have all those things, but we still have pay-per-view within those things. So DAZN obviously came through originally, and their whole thing was like the death of pay-per-view. All their marketing, all their branding was about how pay-per-view is dead. And now you have to buy the pay-per-view by subscribing to them on a 1-week trial. So look, I think DAZN's brilliant. I think they've got so many good fights, but the reality is that the platform contains pay-per-view. Is it the same in UFC?
Yeah, similar. Again, it's sort of geography specific. In the UK, the fight nights, so the not the numbered cards, which are the big pay-per-views, you can get them free provided you're a subscriber to, I believe it's on Discovery Plus now. It was previously TNT Sports, or I think you can access it on both. So if you have a TNT Sports subscription, you can watch the fight nights. And most of the pay-per-view cards, which pay-per-view in America. However, if there's a Conor McGregor fight or maybe a big UK pay-per-view fight, then you might, on occasion, there's normally 2, possibly 3 pay-per-view UK cards a year. In America, every single numbered card is a pay-per-view, and there's 1 a month.
Right. Okay. So I guess that the pay-per-view model is well and alive in both sports.
And again, as you know, it's ridiculous comparison, like your $50, $60 minimum.
Yeah, the US prices are crazy. I would not be paying that. So, and to be fair, so far, you know, the Saudis have provided good value on their pay-per-view prices and cards. And again, though, I do sort of wonder whether that is trying to put that initial investment in, build interest, get more people watching, and then eventually you create this sort of monopoly style league where you're in full control. You can set prices, you can pay fighters what you want to pay them. That would be the concern for me with the whole thing. So we've only got about 20 minutes before I've got to go. So let's talk about 2 things: the youth development and how the boxing governing bodies are going to react. So let's start with youth development, because I find this to be the most promising and exciting part of this potential deal, or this deal, sorry, I should say. What do you make of it in the UFC, Alex, and what do you think it picks up that boxing misses?
Great question. I mean, I think ultimately the future of any sport depends on the current superstars and how much influence and how much they impact the culture of youth and what sport people are going into. The UFC Performance Institute is something that is probably pretty integral here. I know that in the brief that we read at the start, Turki Al-Sheikh and Dana, when they came together, they said that these fighters will have access to the UFC Performance Institutes around the world. Now, these are really high-spec, state-of-the-art training facilities that not only the top fighters there, every fighter can access these. Now, they're looking to expand these and roll these out more, which will naturally have a trickle-down effect, allowing newcomers to the sport to get that kind of access to training and things like that. So I think from an infrastructure point of view, the UFC are doing everything right to get future stars of mixed martial arts not only involved in the sport, but sort of giving themselves the best preparation to be involved in the sport, because not only are they going to be training at amazing facilities, they'll also be training at the place where they could potentially be signed as fighters in the future. And you asked about, youth development in general. Ultimately, I think it comes down to the popularity of the sport, and you need to look a few years in advance. Say if 2020 was a really huge breakout year for the UFC because they continued putting on events when everyone stopped putting on events. That's really one thing that caused that explosion in popularity. And if you think about kids who are watching it then, in their maybe early teens or not even that, in the next 5 years, they'll be coming into the age where they might start competing. So there can be a lot of new mixed martial arts fans, mixed martial arts trainers who will be coming into their sort of athletic ascendancy in the next 5 years.
Yeah, and the second part I was wondering about was what do you think it sort of picks up that boxing misses? So right now, we have like very well established gyms across the world in
Yeah,
boxing. You know, you've got amazing gyms in the UK, old historical gyms, same
yeah,
thing in the US. So
of
a lot
course.
of the fighters come through that production line, and then also we have the Olympics and
Yeah,
amateur scene. But what does the UFC have something that we don't have? Because I've
yeah,
always felt that there was kind of a Rocky Balboa fancy element to the way that Dana White is able to pick these stars out from around the world from some of the poorest countries.
yeah. I mean, there's a. I believe it happened recently. I think it's called the IFMAs, the International Federation of Mixed Martial Arts. They had an event on which was it does sort of look at the amateur side of things as well. But I, again, you talk about these heritage gyms in the UK and these amateur clubs that have been going for years. Mixed martial arts is so new. The first
Mm.
UFC was in the early 90s. It's not just by pure how long it's been going on for. It can't compete with that level of heritage. So of course the history and the sort of the path to follow isn't quite as clear. However, there've been enough waves now and a couple of generations of UFC fighters that pockets do appear. And you mentioned how Dana White can pick out these fighters. Habib from Dagestan, he sort of led the way there, and his father Abdul Manap, their pocket in Dagestan, have created multiple champions and so many fighters in the UFC, all coming from this one town in Dagestan. So I think it's through the fighters that have success in the UFC that has then bred what you see in gyms, in boxing gyms in Detroit, in America, and in the UK that have history and true history behind them. I think we're just starting to see that in the UFC and in mixed martial arts. Southern Florida, South California, Dagestan, the Caucasus, all these areas are real hotbed for mixed martial arts stars. And it's being cultivated by Dana White because the best fighters out of these regions will come to the UFC.
Yeah, very true. And it will be interesting. I think there's a couple of comments here. ATR's come on and said saw Hatman's vid, and we all know that Hatman is excellent at breaking down different boxing topics. And he said this could be great for lesser known. Hearn agrees. So, what do you think to that statement that this could be really good for the lesser known fighters? I mean, we've always spoken about this concept of the who needs them club in boxing, these
Yeah.
guys who are talented, undefeated, but don't have that commercial pulling power. Do you think this could sort out the best from the rest, at least in that category, and then they could be then pushed on to fight the more established champions?
It's really tough because yeah, I'd love to think that, but you need to create the platform that people care about, and you normally do that by giving them names on those platforms that people care about. So just to create a platform with fighters who nobody's heard of yet and try and shine a big light on that, amazing. And I'm sure one or two superstars will come through. But again, like any sport, it's going to shine a light on the top 0.01%. And ultimately, you can't, you can only manufacture it so much. I think that's the
Mm.
case in any sport. Um, and even within a boxing league, there'll be the who needs them club. I think that's just
Yeah.
the way it is.
Yeah. I think it is the nature of fighting as well, is that you can't force someone to box someone. Like that's in like other
Yeah,
sports, it's a bit different. You can create a fixture list and these are the fixtures and this is it. But boxing's different because, you know, at the end of the day, if someone says, I'm not fighting, they're not fighting. And you will probably want them to if they're a big enough name. So it's a very, very difficult one. And
I've got a
you'll only
question
ever
for you.
have,
I've got a
yeah,
question for you
go
on
on,
that, then, Henry, because
go on.
we, the we can use Anthony Joshua as a really obvious example. Eddie Hearn saw
Yeah.
the superstar quality, put his efforts and resources into promoting him as an individual. Now that comment, it was a great comment saying this will be good for the lesser known.
Mm.
Now, what would the incentive be for a promoter to shine a light on a specific individual on that platform? Because if I'm Eddie Hearn, I know the potential rewards I can reap from promoting Anthony Joshua based on the current way that things get done. What would the incentive be to shine a light on these guys? And do they then run the risk of just kind of repeating what they've got going on already?
Well, people like Eddie Hearn are actually an interesting profile in this whole conversation. So, just to answer your question, I think that how do these people want? Why would these people want to see the model change? Well, it's difficult if they're in control of the model. I mean, Eddie Hearn always tried to talk about Matchroom becoming the the sort of the boxing's version of UFC. He talked about this a long time ago, wanting to sign all the best talent and have them under the Matchroom banner, create that sort of UFC model. He'd spoken to Dana White before, had that admiration for him. So the benefit for them makes sense. Turkey essentially is Eddie Hearn in this conversation.
Yeah.
Because guys like Eddie Hearn aren't going to have the power anymore. And in fact, they will just become faces that go around doing promotion for the bigger company. Is in my view and in my opinion, they're basically gonna sell their businesses. Is what it looks like to me, because they're not going to be able to do anything anymore if there is this league which dominates boxing. If they don't sell their businesses, if they maintain control, then you just end up with an additional promotional outfit, basically.
So will the promoters become managers? Is that what you're saying?
I don't even know if they'll be managers. I think possibly. If not managers, then, I mean, if you look at it from like a sort of franchise model, which I always thought could be quite exciting, that's interesting. If the boxing league is like the NFL, and then Matchroom is the Philadelphia Eagles, for example, then that's quite an interesting concept as far as I'm concerned. If you are Matchroom in that situation, I suppose the benefit of moving to that model is that you get sort of more guaranteed revenues and things like that, because you've got prize money for your franchise. If you can control your own commercial rights and stuff like that to a degree, then that helps. You're essentially team building rather than just relying on your fighter, or relying on having like one fighter like an AJ. But at the end of the day, it makes it, in that sort of incarnation of what we're talking about, it makes it far more about who is the best, who has the best roster of fighters. It makes it way more about sporting achievement than it does about who's got the best commercial value. But I don't think that's going to be the model, unfortunately. I think it's going to be more like there is one promotional outfit, and it is this boxing league, basically. And I don't know what will happen to the others. They'll probably disappear. But you've tried to ask me a more basic question, but it's really difficult for me to answer, because I don't know how Eddie Hearn will feel about trying to put a small name in the spotlight, because I don't even know if he's going to have control to make those decisions anymore anyway. So it's a bit of a difficult question to answer. But the comments are going off at the minute about this being a dangerous move for boxing because it will create a monopoly. Steven says, once Turkey monopolizes boxing, the purses will drastically fall. It's not healthy with DAZN having a monopoly on US boxing. ATR says, also someone above me said monopoly.
Can I just jump in on that one, because that's interesting, because one of the sort of arguments against that for so long has been, how can these guys, Canelo, Tyson Fury, justify these purses, especially when they're fighting not the very best of the best on their way up? Because we have seen it. We have seen ridiculous paydays. It's been so long since these fighters have been able to. These fighters at the very top, and this isn't an anti-boxing argument, but these fighters at the very top have been allowed to cherry pick their opponents for a long time, because they know they're going to be paid so much money to fight against fighters that aren't going to be as competitive as they are the very best fighters out there. So that's almost an argument against that.
No, it's true. It's very true. And yeah, I mean, it's trying to find a balance, isn't it, between the fighters having enough power that they still get paid what they should be, but also not having so much power that they're able to cherry pick, basically. Because that is essentially, if you want to really boil it down, the issue that we have currently in boxing, is the long runs you get these big mega champions going on of doing absolutely nothing. I mean, Canelo, for example, hasn't fought the actual legitimate best challengers in front of him for a couple of years now. And then you saw he almost had that Jake Paul fight made recently. Yeah, exactly. It was within a hair's breadth of that fight being made, which just tells you everything that's wrong with what we've got.
And I just want to put a caveat out there. Absolutely, I have the utmost respect for fighters, and it goes without saying, put their health on the line and things like that. But for the comment that says it's going to drastically reduce fighters' purses, we do have to sort of look at that from a relative perspective as well. Because if Canelo isn't able to demand $50 million for his next fight because he's fighting someone who isn't really on his level and he's only getting a couple of $1 million, is that unfair? Is that, let's look at it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of it might not be fair in a macro sense, but if you are Canelo and you've done everything you've done in the sport, you've taken all those huge challenges,
Yeah.
you've had the hardest existence, and you get to a point where finally you have the control, you've got the keys to the
Yeah.
car, and you dictate what you earn and who you fight. I mean, who am I to say that he doesn't deserve that? But at the same time, I'm a fan of the sport, so it's difficult.
Mhm.
Okay, so we'll just have another look at a couple of these comments. So Andrew Manus says, the only thing I don't like about Turkey is he has every mega fight in Saudi with zero advertising. So I guess a big question here is, are they still going to be operating and creating fights on a global level like the UFC do, or is it all going to be in Saudi? Because I do agree with that. I don't think the boxing product is quite the same when the fights are just in Saudi Arabia. And Alvo says, did not mind it when he was using it as a vessel to promote Saudi Arabia, but trying to change boxing, creating belts and leagues is a bit far, which I think speaks to the point I was making earlier, which is I don't think he's just here to blow a load of money to make some fun fights and promote Riyadh season. I think he literally wants to create an investment for the future because they're not going to have their natural resources forever. At some point, as a country, they have to start investing in things that will generate revenue for the country. Mithranda, who is a regular on the channel, has said, if there is no other competition on the market, where are you going to go? You're forced to pay whatever they want. It's terrible for consumers. So yeah, I mean, I think if I've done a poll and I said, is this good or bad for boxing? We've only had 23 votes, but 57% of people think no. So you can see, Alex, the kind of the boxing mindset. I think that it's one of those where people's kind of are finally getting what we've always wanted.
Yeah.
Right now, we're in that transition from what we had to what we're going to get, and in the transition maybe looks better for the consumer than what the final products end up being. And then Claire Hayden has just asked, what happens to smaller events? Which is a really good point. And what happens to your Friday night in the York Hall kind of show? What happens to those small hall shows around the UK?
I mean, there's no reason
like
why those shows would go away at all, because I'm sure there'll still be a local appetite to go out and see the boxing with, be it friends and family at York Hall that holds a couple of thousand people. Those kind of events will still be held. It's probably the middle ground that will really miss out. The sort of the arena shows, because like the commenter pointed out there, kind of what would be the stage for that? It's interesting. I think you made a great point, and it's that we're in such a golden era, a golden age for boxing right now. The last 2 years, people have such short memories. If you go back just over 2 years ago to think about the 2 years that we've just had, you wouldn't believe it, just because of how frustrating boxing had been for so long. And now maybe the reality of the situation is starting to set in, that yes, there might be a price that we're paying for these amazing events, which is what we're seeing now with a potential league and a potential changing of things. So it's an interesting time. All I would say is that people are leaping to the potential worst case scenario with this deal coming out and all the connotations and the potential consequences of it. But in the next few days, I'm sure we'll be getting a lot more details. I'm sure Dana White will do a media tour and things like that. So I'd be very surprised if it's going to be as bad as people think currently.
True, and I think it'll take time as well. I don't think this is going to be an overnight transition. But I think I can do another 5 minutes quickly before I get you to give me your final thoughts on whether this is a thumbs up or a thumbs down for boxing. The belts, the WBC, WBA, WBO, IBF, not the IBO. What do you think their position on this is going to be, and how do they react? Because they're going to want to maintain relevancy. They're not going to want to give up their businesses. So how does this sit with them? I mean, right now they've got to have a working relationship with Turkey because he's got control over so many fighters, but equally he is essentially telling them in this move that you are not going to be relevant anymore.
That's a great question. Look, ultimately they know. It's a really tricky one, because ultimately so far they've had an amazing experience in Saudi because there's been so many belts on the line. The governing bodies are making a lot of money from all these events that are going on, but the man who holds the purse strings might be about to change the rules of the game. So have they not done enough? So, they might wish that they'd boycotted these events beforehand if they knew that he was going to be doing this, but they might have just left it a bit too late. I'm not too sure. It's a great question. What do you think?
I have absolutely no idea. Oh, I've just lost Alex there, guys, because the Zoom meeting ended. I'll get him back in just a second. 1 minute, guys. Basically, Alex just asked me what I think about what the governing bodies will do. To be honest with you, yeah, I'm really not sure. Okay, unfortunately I've lost Alex. I've lost Alex, so I'll have to wrap this by myself. Guys, go and follow Alex's channel. His channel name is in the title of the video. I'll put it in the description as well when we're done. But basically, my feeling is that the belts are, there's too many of them. We've always known that, and they make money. They are businesses at the end of the day, and I have absolutely no idea how they're going to react and respond to this. I don't know what their relationship is like with Turkey. I know that there's been periods of time when they don't align themselves with certain promoters, and therefore those promoters struggle to get shots for their fighters. I remember Eddie had some issues with the WBC, especially with Dylan White. Some of these bodies don't even enforce mandatories, so it's incredibly difficult. I think I see this as a bit of a moment for them, where the way that you've run yourselves over the years of your existence, it might be a moment of reckoning for those governing bodies, where it's like, do you know what? You've had it good for a long time. You've been able to make up the rules as you go along. You've been able to do the things that financially benefit you the most. I think that by running their governing bodies in that manner, I think that is going to be what basically is going to be their comeuppance. And I think that there is going to be a moment where maybe one of them will survive, if not all of them will become irrelevant. I do think that's the case with this Super League. And if you are the WBC, WBA, WBO, IBF, you can't stop Turkey from doing this. It's just an inevitability. It's going to happen. The one thing you will say is that those belts hold a lot of prestige with the former champions and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I think most of us would take a system where there is one title holder over the prestige of the WBC. We'll get to a couple of comments before I go tonight. If you do have a pressing one, because I'm not going to get through all these, do fire in a super chat. If you've got a pressing question, I'll do another 5 minutes and then I've got to bounce. Okay, so Alvo, you said, okay, I've read that one. ATR, this reminds me of the Super League in football. I mean, I suppose the difference with it is we already have a bit of a Wild West in boxing, where football's already way more structured. And that would have been a move for the rich and for the wealthy, and it's a difficult one. I don't know if I can do the mental gymnastics of trying to compare it to the football Super League. I mean, football already has really well structured leagues, a system where the best players do thrive and do come through, and that was more about affecting clubs that weren't at the top level. Whereas I think the idea of this is the other way around. I think this is maybe inverse, where actually over time the fighters with the biggest names, if you were to put them in the system that might exist in 20 years' time, they wouldn't have the commercial power that they have now. So it's almost like an inverse Super League. I don't know if I'm getting that wrong, but it feels like that might be right what I'm saying. Challenge me if you think that's not quite right. Alvo says this reminds me of hell, and that's a very strong sentiment, Alvo. But I understand your feelings. It's an unknown and scary time. We don't know. We don't know what this looks like, and it does worry me a bit having the Saudis in total control of boxing. That is quite a scary thing. We're at the edge right now, where basically it goes one way or another, where the Saudis get full control and they create this league and they have all the commercial power, or it goes the other way and they just don't continue with this investment and boxing goes back to how it was. I definitely don't want that. Boxing was not good for a long time. And having a channel like mine is definitely a lot more sustainable with lots of good fights. So it's very interesting. And I think a transition will be painful. And there'll be a lot of people that don't want to go along with it, including the governing bodies, including some promoters, if not all the promoters, when they realize they're going to lose their ability to generate revenues. But like I said, if it becomes more of a franchise model, and I've done a video about this before, that excites me a great deal. I think that's really interesting. Bethaniel says, "Damn, that's a good question, mate. I'm trying my best to answer that, but it is tough. It's some serious mental gymnastics trying to figure all this stuff out." ATR says this reminds me of Premier League and FA. Yeah, a little bit. ATR says overall it's a good thing. Yeah, guys, get your final comments in. Thumbs up or thumbs down for this new boxing league with Dana White. Steven says the belts are a double-edged sword for fighters because they act as a bargaining chip. Yeah, 100%, mate. 100%. Nathaniel, an unknown future. Indeed, mate. An unknown future. Indeed. Steven says, as good as Al Heyman is, no way Caleb Plant negotiates for a $10 million purse for Canelo without his belt. That's a very, very good point. A very, very good point. ATR, link the video, bro. I think you mean like the video. Maybe. If not, if you guys want Alex's channel, let me get Alex's channel for you so you can go and follow him. I thought he was very good today. And he does know his UFC. He certainly does. And he is on the grind. So, and as I say, oh, drop the link the franchise video. Oh, it's in my channel somewhere, mate. You can go and dig it out. That's Alex's channel. If you want to go and follow him, I've pinned it. And he's also in the description. So if you're into UFC, go and follow him. But guys, other than that, it's been a very quick one today. I've got to go and do a work call now. But I just wanted to get this out quickly. And I know you guys are loving the live streams. We're going to be doing regular videos still too. But for stuff like this, for the news videos, I think I'm going to keep doing live streams because I just find them a bit dull when it comes to actually YouTube videos. So I think for the news videos, we'll do live streams. For the breakdowns and previews and all that stuff, we'll do regular YouTube videos. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for joining me. And as I always say, on to the next one.